G'day, I'm Tim Thompson. Sheep are one of the most rewarding and beautiful animals that you can have on your small holding. But there's a few things you need to be careful of. Today we're going to be talking about fly strike and preventing it. Now, fly strike is caused by a coppery, greeny, blue coloured fly in Australia called the Australian sheep fly. And that's responsible for 90% of all fly strike in Australian sheep flocks. And the good news is, for a small holding, it's easy to prevent. Now, the sheep blowfly loves to feed on faeces, urine, and rotten wool. If you can avoid those three things during the two danger periods for fly, you're 90% there on the way to controlling fly strike without the need for using chemicals. Another important thing is the type of sheep that you choose to run on your small holding. Leave the wrinkly bodied sheep to the professionals. Go for a plain bodied sheep like this little baby doll Southdown here, or this Romney here. And with these type of sheep, there's far less risk of urine and faeces building up in the folds of the skin and causing you management problems that can be very expensive and require a lot of work. Because the idea of a small holding is to enjoy your livestock rather than constantly be battling disease. Now, this little lamb here is a perfect example of why we need to crutch our sheep. For whatever reason, she's decided to scour a bit. The build-up of urine and faeces around her breech is going to attract the sheep blowfly that causes 90% of the problems. And within 24 to 72 hours, eggs laid by those flies are going to hatch into maggots, and in 3 days the damage can be done. So it's really important for a small holder not to wait until your sheep start to smell like fly strike, not to wait until you can see visible signs of fly strike, but get on top of the cause of fly strike before you have a problem, and then you don't need to resort to chemical means of control. The peak periods are late spring to early summer and the end of autumn in what we call the autumn break, because you need about 3 days of moisture for those flies to start laying their eggs and the eggs to hatch. So let's go and meet John Gilligan now from Gilligan's Property Services. He's a very experienced shearer and he does a lot of work all over the state of Victoria looking after small holdings, and he's going to take us through the process of crutching sheep properly, both male and female, using tools that are available to the small holder. He's going to show us how to manage the sheep, he's going to show us how to use the tools, and he's going to show us what a proper crutch looks like. Let's get into it. G'day John, how you doing, mate?
Good, Tim, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Thanks for having us back.
Oh mate, it's a pleasure having you back, because I always look for a shearer that's going to look after the sheep.
Yep.
And that is really gentle and calm with the animals.
Yep.
So we're going to go through the basic process today of crutching, but we thought what was a really good idea is to take people through how to look after their livestock before the shearer comes. And there's nothing worse as a shearer, I'm sure you'd agree with me, turning up to a property and finding sheep that haven't been caught, that are running around the paddock, that are all daggy, maybe a bit of fly strike,
Yep.
and having to deal with a mess.
Yeah.
So when you come to the property, you want the sheep penned up,
Yep.
preferably
Ideally,
overnight.
Preferably overnight, yep. Lets their
Yep.
bellies empty out so they don't struggle as much.
Now that might sound a little bit cruel in that you're taking feed away from them for 12 hours. We don't take water away anymore. But by taking the feed away from them for 12 hours, it just helps that rumen empty out.
Yep.
And when they sit down, they're more comfortable, they don't
That's
kick,
right.
and there's less chance of you actually cutting them.
That's right, and you don't have to fight with them as much. So
Yeah. And you'd like to see sheep crutched when you arrive.
exactly. Well,
Yeah.
it's beneficial for the sheep as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing worse than seeing a sheep that's been fly blown and the maggots actually eating into the carcass of the sheep. So
And you've seen that before, no
I
doubt.
have, yeah, on
Yeah.
many occasions in many different ways.
Not a pleasant thing to do.
No, it's not.
So a small holder should be doing this job about twice a year,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
sort of start of spring, middle of autumn sort of
Yep,
thing.
That's right. And as soon
Yep.
as you see the sheep starting to scour up a little bit and get a bit daggy,
Yep.
or even before then, you'll see them start to get that little bit dirty.
Yep.
Get in there with your blades and or whatever appliance you've got for shearing, and give them a clean up around the back end.
Right. And we've done that indeed for you. We did that about 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
But we have left a couple.
Oh, thanks, Tim.
That's all right. Just for you to
Very well
demonstrate
done.
today. Isn't that lovely of us? So yeah, we've got a couple over here. So
Yep.
can you take us through the process of catching the sheep and
Yep.
throwing the sheep safely for the sheep and the handler?
Yep.
Because you see people throwing sheep in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, it's a real struggle for people who don't know how to approach
Yeah.
that to to actually grab the sheep correctly, and if you do so correctly, they'll pretty much just fall into your hands.
Yeah.
If you try to fight with them in the wrong way, you've got a real battle on your hands.
All right, mate. Well, we'll go through into the pen with you.
Yep.
And follow you along as you catch the sheep.
Yep.
Guide it back out through the door and throw the sheep.
Yep. The best way to catch a sheep is to walk straight at it and grab it by the back end with one hand and around its nose with the other hand, and twist its head back slightly and just lean back, and the sheep should fall down towards you. Easy to say, but probably not as easy to do. So once you've got control of the animal, get her head up out from between your legs, take the front legs and just drag back. And the best position for the sheep to sit comfortably, and for you, is to tilt them over to their side, let their front legs sit up just above your knee, then they should sit nice and quietly.
So you've got her resting on this pin,
Yep.
and you've got the same leg as the pin that she's resting on tucked up behind your leg, and you can see she's just a young yearling. She hasn't been handled much, and she's basically just gone to sleep. All right, so John, you've got a set of hand shears today.
Yep.
Now, you can pick these up from your local rural suppliers for only a few bucks.
Yep, that's correct.
You want to get a good quality pair.
Yeah, that's right. It's a hard enough job without doing it
absolutely
with
it
a
is.
poor pair of shears.
Do you have any tips on how people should check that their shears are operable?
Yeah, look, a sharp pair of shears, you'll notice on the shears you've got a nice clear line indicating no chips or dints in the blade. So if you've got that polished line there, it's indicating that it's got a good sharp edge.
So we're looking at this polished line along here.
That's correct.
And also this polished line along here. Now we only sharpen the shears on one side, they're like scissors, so you only sharpen them on the blade side because you don't want wool to jam between the two blades while you're cutting. And as we close the shears, you'll notice that they only touch in one place during the whole of the movement. You don't want the shears to remain touching, or else that's going to grab wool as well. And that's called the set of the blades. So as John closes them, you can see there's a gap opening here, so you don't get any wool stuck between the blades as you're shearing. All right, John, well, enough on the blade shears.
Yep, let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
Rightio.
So before we even get to the shearing, you're going to do what's called wigging. Is that right, John?
Yeah, that's correct. Just take the wool away from around their eyes. You get this old girl, she's not too bad, but you get some sheep that get very woolly around their eyes. They can't actually see where they're heading. So
And that can cause all sorts of problems for them, can't it?
that's correct. So grab a tuft and just get in there and just snip it away. Come around a little bit behind the eye.
Now you're not pulling too hard on that wool either,
No,
are
I'm
you?
just-
Because you
just
don't want to pull the
supporting it.
skin up and cut it.
That's exactly right. So as you can see there, it's just cleared that wool from around her eye. She can now see where she's heading. So we'll just do the other eye. You can just support her head there between my knees. Careful of the ear as you come around. Make sure you got the blade against that ear so it holds it down. And then just a nice clean cut. Take the rest of that away.
And once again, very, very important to point out that you weren't actually pulling on the wool then, you were just supporting it. Because if people pull on the wool, they'll end up cutting the skin of the sheep.
Down to the back end. Start with, we find the top of the tail. Open her up there, you can see where the tail starts. So we're going to take our first swipe in there and go across the top of the tail so we can see what we're dealing with.
Now you're pulling slightly on the skin to make it nice and flat and firm.
Yeah, but I'm pulling on an area here where I'm not clipping or shearing, so it's not raising the skin. I'm just basically supporting her weight and making a nice clean area or straight area for me to get the shears into.
Now another thing that newbies will do is they'll try and dig the points in and cut off little bits of wool, but you're actually laying the blades flat on the sheep.
Yeah. So now we've opened that top end up, we don't want this loose wool here hanging down over the tail, so we're going to just take that off on an angle. So that wool ends up not hanging down over the sheep's bum and attracting those dags.
Now the sheep will play up from time to time, particularly if it's not used to being handled. You just sort of deal with it, don't you?
Yeah, you just got to find a balance there. So we're going to try and come in just around the back end of the bum hole there. And we have to clean up obviously on the tail. Very, you have to take a lot of care here not to hit the vagina. So grab that tail, pull it back so you can get that wool in underneath.
So once again, you're controlling the skin around the wool that you're cutting
Yep.
by pulling away.
Away, yep. Okay, so now we're going to head out towards the back leg, and in here the sheep's hamstring runs through, and if you do happen to hit that with the shears, you run the chance of cutting through the skin and into the hamstring, and if you do cut that hamstring through, the sheep will never be able to walk properly again, and pretty much will
Basically,
have to be put down.
It's basically a death sentence, isn't
Yeah,
it?
so you have to be very careful of that.
All right, so how do we avoid
So to
hitting
avoid
the
that,
hamstring?
you have a look to in around this area where the sheep's hip is. You grab a handful of wool and push, you'll see that leg just extend out, and she pretty much can't pull that back in until you take that weight off.
So it's a firm pressure, but you're not hurting the animal.
Firm pressure, but you're doing it for her benefit. So roll her back to open that area of wool up.
Now you're coming right down the leg there, John.
Yeah.
Basically everywhere that she can wee or poo on herself needs to be removed.
See, as you cut that wool, you can use your blades to flick the wool away, and that way you can see where your blades are heading. Now we're going to come down there under the vulva. Use that back side of the blade to press against her if you need to, but make sure you angle the tip of the blade away from that leg. You don't want to be diving the blade in towards the leg for obvious reasons of damaging the sheep.
So once again, the opposite of what you intuitively do. You don't want to dig the point in, you want to keep the point away, and you want to lay the blades flat on the skin.
Clean up any little bits that do sort of show themselves up as you're moving along. Now you're going to have to, at this stage, release her leg and pull that tail up so that you can see in the back there, and just continue to take that dirty wool away.
So you're working well past the tail before you flip her over.
Yeah. You can see that angle of just cutting that wool away so that you don't get any long bits hanging over the top of her tail and potentially getting dagged. The more you can lean them back, they're not laying on their own wool, and that makes it a little bit easier to cut through. If they're actually laying on top of the wool, it causes it to bunch, it makes it a lot harder to cut through.
And you've got a real angle coming out from the crotch to just to stop any of that splashing or sort of flicking of poo, so that she is now reasonably fly proof.
So, just to release her, all you need to do is roll her away from you, head her towards the door, she'll do the rest.
Well, thanks very much, mate.
No worries.
It's actually a lot of fun, and it's quite rewarding once you
Yeah.
get it done. It's kind of like being your own personal hairdresser for
Hairdresser,
these animals.
barber.
Yeah.
Barber.
And we're looking forward now to doing this twice a year, typically.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yep. Yep. So get that in the spring and in the autumn, and get them cleaned up, and they'll be a lot happier, and you'll be a lot happier because your sheep will be healthy.
And I mean, you can obviously get a contractor such as yourself to do that.
Yeah, that's right.
And certainly the large producers do.
Yep.
But there's nothing more rewarding than doing easily manageable tasks on your own property.
Yeah.
I mean, with small holdings, that's why you guys get them.
Yeah, that's right.
May as well have a go and
Yep.
learn on the job.
That's right.
The main thing is don't dig those tips in and
Yeah.
cut the animal.
That's right. Just keep those shears heading away from those hamstrings.
Yeah.
That's the
very
main thing.
good. All right. Well, thanks very much, mate.
No worries.
Let's have a quick look now at some simple battery operated shears that people might be interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
And we might demonstrate just cleaning up around the pizzle
Yep.
of a little weather as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
Because when you've got weathers, you've also got to worry about the penis, and that is located, if you didn't know, sort of halfway up the body of the sheep.
Yeah.
And that's another area, obviously, that will get stained with urine and attract
Yeah,
the
that's
flies.
right. They get pretty dirty. So.
Yeah. All right, let's get our weather and
right.
demonstrate the electrics. Now, another option for hobby farmers is a set of electric shears. Now, you can buy something like this for a few $100s, but you've got a few tips to keep these running well, John.
It's always good to keep your equipment oiled up before you start, especially. So you've got an oil point here at the top. You get some oil down here. That puts oil down into the post, which runs from the tension nut here all the way down to the forks. That's how you get tension on the cutter, which provides a good cutting surface across the comb. So a dab of oil down there, and then run a bit across the actual comb and cutter. Focus a little bit in there where the holes are in the cutter. It gets it underneath the cutter, and that way it'll have a nice lubricated surface to get work across.
Now, John, you're recommending that a hobby farmer or an amateur should maybe oil their cutters with each sheep that they shear.
Yeah, that's probably the best way. The more time you spend poking around on this short wool especially, you're in that dirty wool, and the dirt collects under the cutter and then creates friction, and that friction creates heat, so your gear starts to overheat. It's not good for the equipment, and it's certainly not good for your hand. When it gets that hot you can't hang on to it. A little bit of oil applied will stop that happening.
All right, so once again, you've set him up between your legs, rolled over onto that pin with the same leg caught up near the back of your leg there. Take us through the process of crutching with these hand shears on a weather.
Okay, they're a little bit more wriggly, these lambs, so you tend to have to bring your knees together to hold them, and you probably find you'll use your wrist here to pin them against your legs. You don't have as much control as you do with the bigger sheep to actually hold them with your legs.
And a lot of that's an important point. A lot of hobby farmers are going for small sheep, but actually the large ones they might actually find are easier to manage.
They can be, yeah. Okay, so we want to take a nice little ring of wool away from that pizzle area. As that wool grows longer, it'll hang over his pizzle and collect a lot of urine, which it's not good for the wool. It also creates an environment that flies could also attack. All right, we'll start our shears up. And you need to be careful not to go into the pizzle, go to it, and then get around holding the pizzle with your fingertips, around under the pizzle, using your fingers to push the belly down so that it lays flat, and then finish off by taking one over the top. And that's cleaned him up.
So a set of simple, cheap electric shears are certainly a good investment for a hobby farmer that's got a number of sheep.
Yeah, exactly, and you'll find them a lot easier to do this sort of work with than the actual hand shears.
So a lot of people are going to be wanting to buy a set of rechargeable or plug-in electric shears for themselves for hobby purposes, particularly for crutching, because it does make the job easier.
Easier, for sure.
But John, just buying them, taking them out of the box and using them is probably the biggest mistake someone could make, because they're probably not going to come set up. You're
That's
going to
right.
take us through the process of setting up now?
Yeah, it's critical that you do set the comb and cutter up correctly. That'll give you a better cut on the wool surface.
Yep.
If you're incorrectly set up, you'll find that the comb will drag through the wool, and you'll be fighting to try and get the comb to push through. So we'll take you through that procedure now. So here we've got the handpiece with the forks, and this is called the tension nut. So we tip the handpiece over, and we take our cutter, and you'll find there's a little tip here and here that the cutter sits on, in here. So we locate that cutter onto those tips.
So if it's located properly, it shouldn't slip up and down.
It won't move once it's in place. Then you bring your comb in and sit the comb over the top of the cutter, and just gently tighten up these screws to make sure that the comb doesn't fall out. If it does fall out and hit the floor, it'll break like it has in this occasion here. These tips shouldn't be like that, and if they do break, you end up with a very pinchy surface there that will damage your sheep when you try to shear them or crutch them. So our tip would be, if you do end up breaking your comb, replace it. You're going to hurt your animal otherwise.
And if you're stuck, if this happened and you're stuck and you've got to do the job, at least file off the edge of that to make it a rounded surface so it doesn't pinch the animal.
So it's not pinchy. Right, so we turn the handpiece over and we try to locate these tips of the cutter in reference to this beveled edge of the comb.
So we're looking here, you've got a shiny beveled edge here on the comb, and these are the tips of the cutter that you're referencing here.
That's correct. So we want to bring that comb down until this cutter sits about a match width thickness between the tip of the cutter and the end of the bevel on the comb. And once you've achieved that point there, you need to push your cutter across to the side. You'll see here it's actually overextending off the end of the comb. And we've got a little bit of room to move on this side.
So that means it needs to go across that way
So
a
we
little
want to
bit.
bring that comb across a little bit so that it just...
So when we did our nuts up on the bottom before, we made sure that we didn't do them up too tight so that you've got a little bit of wiggle room. It's firm, but you can move it. So just refreshing, we want to make sure that the cutters here mounted on these feet are one match width below the bevel on the comb, and we want to make sure that the cutters only throw to the side of the comb on each side and they're not overlapping on one side or the other.
Okay, and once you've got that comb in position and the cutter in position, turn your handpiece back over, supporting it against an edge like this. You can push your screwdriver down into that screw and really tighten that up. The last thing you want is for that comb to start moving around once you've set it. But always support that handpiece against something so that you're not going to slip off and drive that screwdriver into your finger.
Now the tension nuts, John, can you just walk us through those?
This tension nut is designed to be screwed down to apply pressure downwards onto these forks, which again applies pressure onto the cutter against the comb. Excess pressure will result in the handpiece overheating, so it's a fine balance between just tight enough and a little nip.
So are you going to where it just feels firm and stopping?
And stopping, yep. And then just give it a little nip down after that, just a little nip. And then that'll put that little bit of pressure down that should give you a good cut. So we start with a little bit of oil and start your cutter up, or your handpiece up. Now, as you work through your mob of sheep, you might find that you start to drag, the comb drags through the wool because the cutter and the comb are actually starting to blunten a little. You can apply a little bit more pressure through that tension nut, just again a nip, just enough to put that little bit more pressure onto the cutter, and that should give you a little bit of an extended life on that cutter and comb.
So thanks very much for that advice, John. We've got a wealth of knowledge, not only in how to catch the sheep and throw them easily without breaking your back, but also in terms of how to crutch the sheep using either hand shears or battery operated shears, and how to set up both for success.
Right. Yep. Yeah, the key is to setting them up correctly.
So it's a really rewarding thing to do, guys. You get to look after the animals, and after all, why did you get animals in the first place if not to look after them? Get out there, get into it, have a go. And as always, John, if people want to get in touch with you, Gilligan Property Services, right across Victoria.
Yep.
And there's a link on the website if you want to get in touch. Mate, thanks very much.
No worries.
I'm going to let you set up your plant and start shearing.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tim.
So, John, you were on the shears for a fair while when you were a young bloke.
Yeah, I left school at 15 and headed off shearing.
That's pretty young.
Yeah. My teachers all advised against it, but I was pretty strong-willed and wanted to head down that avenue. My father was a shearer and my brother, so...
Yeah, and I think you've got to do what you want to do, don't you? You've got to be passionate about stuff. I mean, from my point of view, I see kids in school that shouldn't be in school.
Yeah.
And I see kids leaving school that shouldn't leave school. I suppose you had a direction and a drive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's worked out for you.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
After shearing for nearly 10 years, I thought I had more to offer my life, and so I headed into plumbing. And
right.
I took on plumbing as an apprenticeship at 24, and got through that and started my own business as a plumber. And after 20 odd years in the plumbing industry, I've ventured into another avenue which is Gilligan Property Services.
And so now you work all over Victoria and you coordinate everything for small holders and large holders.
Yeah, that's right.
From fencing to plumbing to electrical to shearing.
Yep.
The whole works.
Yep. Anything. If we can't do it, we'll organise it for you. So.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put a link on the website straight to you guys.
Great.
And we'll help people out with some good tradies that actually care for livestock and actually care about their welfare.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, very good. And the good news is, for a small holding, it's easy to prevent. And rotten wool to build up on your sheep, causing... Sheep are one of the most rewarding and beautiful animals that you can have on your... You're right, Rosie?